How do you know when the devil is speaking through someone you love, when their voice is calm, their words are warm, and yet something in your chest quietly recoils? What if the enemy doesn't growl, doesn't scream, doesn't curse your name, but instead whispers in soft tones, laced with logic and familiarity? This is how the devil works through trust, not by sounding foreign, but by sounding exactly like someone you once ran to for safety. And that's what makes it so hard. Because when the voice is familiar, when it sounds like home, when it comes wearing the face of someone you would have defended blindly, you don't expect betrayal. You don't expect deception, you expect comfort. And that's the opening he waits for, not the weak moments, the trusted ones. The devil rarely kicks down the door. He prefers the back entrance, the gentle laugh, the hug that holds too long, the advice that twists subtly over time. His voice doesn't carry the scent of sulfur. It smells like your childhood. It sounds like your best friend. It remembers your birthday. It remembers your wounds. It studies the shape of your pain and recites it back to you like scripture, not to heal you, but to hold you hostage to your own vulnerability. You hear it when someone says, "I only want what's best for you," but your body feels suffocated. You feel it when someone insists, "You're overreacting," but your intuition is screaming in sirens. This isn't the devil with horns. This is the devil with empathy, performance, and well-rehearsed compassion. You were never taught to question love. You were taught to guard yourself against strangers, not the ones who know your secrets. And so when someone you trust begins to speak in riddles that sound like concern but feel like control, you second-guess your own perception. You tell yourself they couldn't mean harm because they've been there for you. They've walked with you. But even the serpent walked through Eden, side by side with innocence, until one day it spoke, and it didn't shout. It simply planted a question, subtle and seductive. Are you sure? That's how it begins. Not with darkness, but with doubt. Not with fear, but with familiarity. And that's why it cuts so deep. Because the voice doesn't come from the shadows. It comes from someone who's held your hand in the light. This is not about blaming people. This is about recognizing influence. The devil doesn't need to possess a person's soul. He only needs to borrow their voice. And when he does, it often comes through those you'd least expect, the ones who comfort you while planting seeds of confusion, the ones who encourage your growth only when it aligns with their control, the ones who claim to protect your light but grow colder the brighter you become. Evil rarely introduces itself. It lets you believe it's love. It lets you feel safe before it steals your clarity. And by the time you feel something's wrong, you've already silenced your intuition for the sake of preserving the relationship. That is the most dangerous kind of evil, the one that makes you doubt yourself in their name. And if you've ever felt that, you're not paranoid, you're not broken, you're starting to hear clearly, and what you hear next might change everything. There's a certain kind of smile that doesn't reach the soul. It curves the lips just right, sparkles the eyes at the surface, and yet, somewhere deep inside, you feel your chest tighten. You can't explain it. On paper, they're kind, helpful, supportive even. But your spirit doesn't trust what your mind is trying to justify, and that's the first sign you're not dealing with a person, but with a pattern of spiritual dissonance cloaked in charm, a pattern where love is performed like a play, but the script was written to keep you small. The smile becomes the mask, and the mask becomes the prison you convince yourself to stay inside, just to avoid being called ungrateful. You try to reason with the discomfort. You tell yourself they've done so much for you. You replay the good memories, the shared jokes, the quiet moments that made you feel safe. But still, every time you share a new dream, their eyes flicker, not with joy, but calculation. Every time you grow, they give you praise wrapped in backhanded compliments. And when you speak your truth, they suddenly retreat into silence or twist your words into guilt. It's not always loud, it's often a quiet war, but your nervous system doesn't lie. It picks up on the false notes, the mismatched energy, the tension behind their applause. The body feels what the soul sees before the mind can admit it. This person's love comes with invisible chains. When you're around them, your light dims. You become smaller, not because they told you to, but because you've learned that your bigness makes them uncomfortable. You shrink your voice. You second-guess your intuition. You dress your honesty in politeness. And every time you walk away from a conversation, you feel more confused than before it started. That confusion is not weakness. It's a signal, a sacred alert from your spirit, trying to wake you up from the trance. Because real love doesn't require you to betray yourself in order to be accepted. Real safety doesn't cost your sanity. But spiritual manipulation, it thrives in confusion. It feeds on your self-doubt. It grows stronger every time you give someone the benefit of the doubt over your own clarity. And maybe it's taken years to admit it, but you're finally beginning to see through the smile. Not with hatred, not with bitterness, but with holy clarity. You're seeing how charm has been used to keep you compliant, how their warmth was conditional, how your growth triggered their need to control. This isn't just emotional abuse. This is spiritual warfare disguised as connection. And you, my love, are no longer asleep to it. You're noticing the patterns. You're hearing the subtle tones behind their words. You're watching how they react when you rise. And while the world may call it sensitivity, the truth is this: your gift is discernment. And that gift will set you free if you let it speak louder than their smile. It's the hardest thing in the world to question someone who's been your lifeline, someone who showed up when others left, someone who held your tears when you didn't have language for the pain. But sometimes, the very people who saved you in one season are the ones suffocating you in the next. And you're not evil for seeing it. You're not betraying them by wondering. You're awakening. Because spiritual manipulation doesn't always come from enemies. It often comes wrapped in loyalty. That's how it works. The devil doesn't attack you through people you expect. He speaks through those you've placed on pedestals, through the ones who feel too sacred to question. That's where the silence grows thick. That's where your truth gets buried. You've probably felt it before, the guilt of even having the thought, maybe this isn't good for me anymore. You catch yourself ashamed, spiraling into gratitude to wash the doubt away. But gratitude isn't meant to be a muzzle. It's meant to coexist with clarity. You can honor someone's past goodness and still name the harm they're causing now. You can love the history and still leave the present. That inner war you feel, the tug between loyalty and liberation, is the battlefield of your soul. And it's sacred. Because when you start to sense the devil's voice in someone you trust, it doesn't mean they're demonic. It means something inside them has been hijacked. A wound, an ego, a fear. And now that voice is echoing through their words, their decisions, their tone, and it's affecting you. But here's the truth they don't want you to believe. You are allowed to outgrow the people who once held you. You are allowed to evolve past the energies that used to feel like home. You are allowed to change your mind about who is safe. That's not betrayal, that's spiritual maturity. You're not discarding love. You're discerning what kind of love actually honors your expansion. Because real love doesn't clip your wings. It doesn't guilt you for needing space. It doesn't confuse compliance with care. But when someone's shadow is louder than their soul, they might start using your kindness as a leash. They might dress control in the costume of concern. And if you're not awake to it, you'll start calling your own spiritual death loyalty. You are not bad for noticing the shift. You are not cold for needing distance. You are not wrong for trusting your gut over someone's reputation. This is your becoming. This is your awakening. And yes, it's terrifying to even entertain the idea that someone you love might be guided by something darker than they realize. But what's scarier is silencing your soul just to preserve an image of safety that's already crumbling. You are allowed to doubt what you love. You are allowed to feel what you feel. And if their voice no longer brings peace, if their presence disturbs your inner truth, then it's time to stop explaining yourself. The devil doesn't need you to hate someone. He just needs you to abandon yourself for them. Don't. Not anymore. There's a type of love that looks like protection but feels like prison. It's wrapped in compliments, disguised as concern, laced with phrases like, "I just want what's best for you." Yet beneath the surface, there's a grip, a quiet force that pulls you away from your intuition and into their version of reality. At first, it feels like care. They're always there, always helping, always offering advice before you even ask. But over time, you realize their kindness has a price. your freedom, your autonomy, your voice. Because when someone uses goodness as a weapon, when they mask control with compassion, what you're experiencing is not love. It's domination wearing the skin of devotion. You start to notice the pattern. Every decision you make without their input is met with subtle withdrawal. Every moment you express independence is followed by guilt-tripping, stonewalling, or unsolicited correction. They become your mirror, not reflecting your truth, but projecting their own fear, their own shadow, their own unmet needs. And when you resist, they remind you of all they've done for you. They tally the years, the sacrifices, the favors, and suddenly your desire to grow feels like betrayal. But that's not love, it's spiritual manipulation. Real love doesn't keep score. It doesn't need you to shrink in order for it to feel secure. But when the devil's voice slips through someone's mouth, it speaks the language of righteousness. It uses virtue as a leash. It makes control feel holy. You may have spent years believing their guidance was wisdom. And maybe it was, once, but now it feels heavy. Now it stifles your clarity. And every time you try to pull away, they remind you how much worse things could be without them. That's not support. That's spiritual codependency. That's emotional blackmail. And the more you wake up to it, the more you see. This isn't about whether they love you. It's about whether that love is free. Love that demands allegiance isn't love. It's fear dressed in devotion. And fear, when left unhealed, becomes the perfect microphone for darkness. The devil doesn't need new words. He just needs a familiar mouth. And when he finds it, he starts twisting love into leverage. But here's the holy truth. You are allowed to see the mask. You are allowed to name what no one else sees. You are allowed to say, this doesn't feel right, even when everyone else calls it loyalty. The devil thrives in unspoken contracts. The ones where you stay silent to keep the peace, where you smile to avoid confrontation, where you ignore your gut because it would be too painful to face what's really happening. But the moment you name it, the moment you say, this is control, not care, the spell begins to break. Not just over them, but over you. You begin to reclaim your discernment. You begin to walk in your own authority. And that's what the devil fears most. Not your rebellion, but your revelation. Not your anger, but your awakening. So go ahead, see through the mask, and watch what happens next. The most dangerous voice isn't the one that mocks God. It's the one that uses his name to silence you. The one that weaponizes sacred texts to control your choices. The one that cherry-picks verses and calls it truth, not to liberate, but to dominate. That's the gaslight gospel, a gospel where obedience is demanded, not discerned, where honor is used to excuse abuse and submission is twisted into slavery of the soul. You've probably heard it before, spoken not just in churches, but in homes, friendships, and partnerships. God says to forgive, they remind you, but only after they've crossed every boundary. You're being prideful, they say, when you try to speak your truth. Love covers a multitude of sins, they quote, hoping you'll ignore the one that's hurting you right now. These are not random misquotes. These are incantations, spells designed to keep you obedient to someone else's comfort. This is how the devil operates in spiritual communities, relationships, and bloodlines. He doesn't argue with the truth, he co-opts it. He rebrands control as righteousness and submission as holiness. And the moment you begin to question, they accuse you of rebellion. You're told you're drifting, backsliding, being deceived. But the real deception is this: using the name of God to keep someone in bondage. That's not faith. That's fear with a Bible verse taped over it. That's ego in a priest's robe. And that's where the devil thrives, right in the pulpit of someone's unchecked pain. Because when someone hasn't faced their own shadow, they'll speak in absolutes. They'll claim divine authority over your life. And if you don't know your own inner voice, you'll confuse their control for conviction. You may have trusted their insight once. You may have leaned on their spiritual maturity, but now something feels off. Not because you're drifting, but because you're evolving. You're no longer afraid of asking hard questions. You're no longer ashamed for feeling what you feel. And that terrifies them because your awakening exposes their illusion. It reveals that their faith was never about love. It was about power. It was about being the voice you always deferred to. But now you're remembering that God speaks in stillness, not shame. That truth feels like peace, not confusion. And that real guidance doesn't demand submission. It invites it through love. If someone has to manipulate you into alignment, they're not guiding you. They're using you. And maybe you're scared to say it out loud. But here it is, that voice in your life, the one using God as a threat instead of a refuge. It's not holy, it's hijacked, and you're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to reclaim your direct line to the divine without asking for their permission. Because the moment someone claims to speak for God but uses fear to do it, you can be sure that's not the voice of heaven. That's the voice of control, and control has never saved a soul. But your clarity, your intuition, your discernment forged through fire, that's where God lives. Not in their volume, but in your quiet knowing. So trust it, even when it shakes everything, especially when it does. There's a silence that comes after truth that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like punishment. You finally gather the courage to speak, to name what's been festering in your spirit for far too long. Your voice trembles, your hands sweat, your soul quakes. And in that moment, you expect a response, an apology, a conversation, a softening, but instead you're met with stillness. Not the holy kind, not the kind that heals, the kind that isolates, the kind that punishes, the kind that says, "How dare you speak against me?" It's the silence that echoes louder than any scream, the withdrawal that feels like exile, the sudden absence of affection. You spoke your truth, and now you're alone with it. That's how you know this wasn't love. It was compliance dressed in care. And now that you're no longer performing, the stage has gone dark. At first you doubt yourself. You wonder if you were too harsh, too emotional, too much. You replay the conversation 100 times in your head, analyzing every word, trying to figure out what you could have said differently to avoid the rupture. But deep down, this isn't about what you said. It's about the fact that you said it at all, because your truth disrupts the system. It confronts the illusion they've carefully maintained. And when someone is more attached to control than connection, your honesty becomes a threat. Not because it was cruel, but because it was clear. Clarity is terrifying to those who build intimacy on confusion. It exposes what was never real. It removes the mask they used to keep you near. And so they retreat, not out of pain, but out of strategy. This is where the devil's voice reveals its deeper strategy, not just through the person's words, but through their silence. The silence says, "You've hurt me," when really it means you've stopped being useful. The silence says, "I'm giving you space," when in truth it's saying, "Feel the weight of what you've done." That's not love, that's spiritual manipulation. It turns your healing into an offense. It makes your growth a betrayal. And if you're not careful, you'll confuse their absence with your guilt. But listen closely, the ones who vanish when you tell the truth were never holding space for you. They were holding power. And now that they've lost it, they use silence as a weapon to win it back. To make you question, to make you crawl, to make you return on your knees. But this is where your soul learns a deeper language, the language of not chasing, the sacred art of sitting in your truth, even when it costs you connection. You learn to withstand the withdrawal. You learn to breathe through the disapproval. You learn to say, "I meant what I said," without the need for a rebuttal, and it hurts. God, it hurts. To be punished for being real, to be abandoned for being honest, to watch someone you loved morph into coldness because you finally stopped shrinking. But in that ache, there is also something holy, a rupture that sets you free, a silence that clears the air. Because what leaves after the truth was never love, it was leverage. And now that it's gone, you can finally see what was real. So let them go quiet. Let them vanish. Let them withhold the words they used to keep you bound. You are not here to beg for understanding from those who only listen to control. You are not here to be reinvited into circles that punish your evolution. You are here to walk in truth, no matter the cost. Because the cost of staying silent is far greater. The cost of denying your soul for the sake of peace is a slow death. And you've already tasted too much resurrection to go back to the grave. So let the silence come and let it pass. You are not crazy. You are not cruel. You are not alone. You are becoming. And those who cannot sit with your truth were never meant to carry your light. Let them leave. And listen instead to the sound of your soul, finally free. There comes a moment on this journey where the devil no longer hides in others. He starts to show up in your reflection. After the silence, after the distance, after you've named the truth and they've walked away or turned cold, what lingers isn't just loss, it's shame. Not because you did something wrong, but because you're staring at the ruins of a relationship you once protected like a temple. And now, as you sift through the ashes, a deeper grief begins to surface, not just for who they were, but for who you were while loving them. You begin to see it clearly, the ways you ignored your gut, the times you laughed through your discomfort, the years you gave more than you had just to feel chosen. And that's where the demon whispers, not from their mouth anymore, but from inside your head. It tells you this was your fault, that you're the toxic one, that if only you'd kept quiet, they'd still be here, that you broke it all. And because you're self-aware, because you're sensitive, because you've done the work, you listen. You examine your wounds, you spiral into self-analysis. But discernment without compassion becomes another form of self-harm. The truth is, you were surviving, you were loving with what you knew. You were loyal to a version of someone you desperately needed to be real. And now, as the mask falls from their face, it's falling from yours too. You're seeing how much of your identity was wrapped in being needed, in being good, in being easy to love. You're seeing how much of your own shadow was projected onto them, and that revelation burns. But here's where the transformation begins. When you realize that seeing your part doesn't mean you deserve the pain. It means you're reclaiming your power. It means you're taking back the pieces of yourself you outsourced to someone else. It means you're no longer seeing through the eyes of the child who just wanted to be safe, but through the eyes of the soul that came here to awaken. Yes, you missed the signs. Yes, you stayed too long. Yes, you made excuses. But that doesn't make you weak. That makes you human. That makes you loyal. That makes you someone who believed in light, even when it was being used to blind you. And now you see. Now you feel. Now you know that the devil doesn't just come to steal your joy. He comes to distort your reflection. This is the grief they never talk about. The grief of seeing yourself clearly after spiritual entanglement. The grief of realizing that part of the pain wasn't just what they did. It was who you became trying to keep them. And the only way to heal it is not by running from the mirror, but by looking deeper, by loving the version of you that stayed, that hoped, that tried, that bent, that broke, that compromised, that endured, because that version didn't know better. That version was doing what they thought love required. But now you do know. Now you see the demon behind the mirror. And it's not you. It's the voice that was planted in you by someone who couldn't love you purely. And every time you choose truth over shame, silence over performance, presence over pretending, that voice loses its grip. You don't need to go to war with your reflection. You don't need to exile the parts of you that got it wrong. You need to hold them, forgive them, thank them, because they brought you here, to this reckoning, to this clarity, to this moment of raw, holy confrontation with your own soul. And that's where true power begins, not in the destruction of the past, but in the honoring of it. You're not broken for seeing what you see now. You're blessed. And that blessing may have cost you everything you thought love was, but what it gave you in return is worth far more, sight. And no one can take that from you again. Letting go isn't just an action, it's a death of the version of you that waited for their apology, a death of the illusion you kept feeding just to feel safe, a death of the hope that one day they'd see what they were doing to you and change. And when you finally walk away, when you finally say, no more, it doesn't feel like victory, it feels like mourning. You grieve, not only what you lost, but what you never truly had. The connection you kept trying to revive, the honesty you begged for, the mutuality you prayed would one day manifest. You grieve the story you told yourself, the future you envisioned, the belief that love alone could heal what was never being acknowledged. And in the silence that follows, there is an ache that no amount of clarity can immediately numb. People talk about healing like it's a straight road, like once you choose yourself, you should feel empowered. But sometimes choosing yourself feels like betrayal, like abandonment, like a limb has been severed from your spirit and the phantom pain keeps pulsing long after the person is gone. That's the exit wound, the place where their presence once lived inside you, the place you had built a home around, the place that now echoes with absence, questions, and an unbearable kind of quiet. You may doubt everything. Was it really that bad? Did I overreact? Was I the problem? That's the scar tissue speaking, the imprint of manipulation still fading from your skin. And even though you know deep down that leaving was necessary, the grief still demands to be felt. Because even toxic love can feel like home when you've lived inside it long enough. But here's what you must remember. Walking away was not weakness, it was wisdom. You didn't leave because you stopped loving them. You left because you started loving you. And that love, at first, may feel hollow, it may feel shaky, it may feel like talking to a stranger inside your own chest. But over time, you'll hear it more clearly. The voice of your own soul, no longer drowned out by their demands, their expectations, their needs. You'll feel it in the way your body softens when you no longer have to explain yourself. You'll taste it in the peace that lingers where chaos once lived. And though it may come slowly, healing always arrives in whispers, not declarations. It arrives in small moments of self-trust, in nights where you sleep deeply for the first time in years, in mornings where your breath no longer catches in your throat. And when the memories come back, and they will, don't push them away. Don't shame yourself for missing them or for remembering the good. That's what makes you human. That's what proves you loved sincerely, even if they didn't know how to receive it. But let that ache teach you something. Let it guide you into higher discernment. Let it remind you of what you deserve, of what you'll never settle for again. Because what you left wasn't just a person. It was a pattern, a voice that didn't belong in your mind, a presence that spoke over your truth. And every step you take away from it, even when your legs shake, is a step back into your power. You walked through fire to reclaim yourself. That wound on your soul, it's not just pain, it's proof you made it out. And the next time something familiar tries to creep back in, you'll recognize it instantly, not by how it speaks, but by how it makes you feel, and you'll choose differently. Because now you know, you were never crazy, you were never too sensitive, you were never making it up. That tightness in your chest, that discomfort in your gut, that quiet sorrow that bloomed every time their voice twisted your reality. It was real. It was all real. The devil doesn't always come roaring. Sometimes he comes wrapped in good intentions, wearing the scent of someone you love, speaking just softly enough to make you question your own clarity. But now you see it. Now you understand why you felt torn in half between what your body screamed and what your mind tried to silence. You weren't broken. You were awakening. And that awakening cost you what wasn't meant to stay. There will be moments you still ache, moments you long for the version of them you imagined. But you'll also notice something else, the return of your inner voice. The one that used to be so faint, you mistook it for fear. The one that now speaks with authority, with peace, with truth. You've reclaimed that voice. You've peeled it out of their hands. And no matter how long it took, no matter how many times you doubted yourself along the way, you're here, still breathing, still becoming. And far wiser than before. This chapter doesn't end with revenge. It doesn't end with them realizing what they did. It ends with you standing in your truth without needing anyone to validate it. It ends with you walking out of the fog, wearing your scars like scripture, your silence like armor, your soul no longer for rent. You were never crazy. You were being shown something sacred, something terrifying, something that would unravel you just enough to rebuild you. And now that you know what the devil's voice sounds like in someone you trust, you'll never confuse it with love again.